What colour are they? They're sort of purpley colour, I think. Am I right? Yes. This sort of colour. And I'm sure you're aware that if you want to follow or to download, to read what I'm preaching on, you can find the whole text of this morning's message and a few other bits and pieces. And if I miss anything out, you see, you can either pick it up or you can tell me off afterwards for missing it out or making up something that's not there. You can either scan this in with your phone, or else there's a little URL there. You can type into your browser on your PC, and you can get. You see, if you're feeling very, very smart, you can scan that on your phone now, and you can follow what I'm saying, and you can actually work it out as we go along. And I know some people have been doing that. So there you are. There you are. So take a pen, take your notes, and we'll come to God's word. Let's pray. Father, we believe that your word is your word, whether it's presented over the internet or over a PA system or just one-to-one, as we're going to hear about it today. And we pray that your word will take root in our hearts, and that as a result our lives may be more like Jesus. I pray, Lord, that the word of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts may be acceptable in your sight. Amen. You know, if I asked you to compile a list of the Bible's greatest missionaries, I don't suppose many of our lists would have this name, Apollos, on it. He may not be particularly famous, but he enters the story of the early church at a crucial moment. And I've classed him as one of the great missionaries of the Bible, not only because of the moment that he came, but because of what he did and the way he did it. And we're going to be unpacking that in a moment. Before we do it, however, we need a little bit of backstory. So if you'd like to take your Bible and look at verse 18 of Acts chapter 18, you'll see this. That when Paul stayed in Corinth for a while, he left the brothers and sailed to Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. And before he had sailed, he had his hair cut off at Kentria because of a vow that he'd taken. Now, my purpose this morning is not to expound to you the values of first century barbershop. Nevertheless, the reason why Paul had his hair cut off is quite instructive. It's quite likely, we can't prove it, but it's quite likely, that Paul had taken a Nazarite vow, a temporary vow, that was aimed at helping him say something important to the Lord. And if you want to thank the Lord or have a spiritual workout in this day and age, how would you go about it? Now, in Paul's day, one of the ways they would go about it was to take a Nazarite vow. And these Nazarite vows were promises of separation to the Lord for a defined period, which anyone could take at times where they wanted to deepen their walk with God or to thank God for something. And in Paul's day, for example, it would have included not drinking any alcohol or grape juice or vinegar. One would be particularly careful about what to keep one's life pure ethically. And as a sign that you were going through the Nazarite period, you wouldn't have your hair cut. That was an outward indication that you were devoting your inner spirit to the Lord for that time. And in fact, there's an ancient Jewish writer whose name is Josephus, and he talks about taking Nazarite vows, and he says that it was often done as a way of thanking the Lord for preservation from perilous circumstances or deliverance from grave dangers. Now just think about it. Where's Paul just been? Paul has just narrowly escaped a severe beating. He had every reason to be grateful to God that he was still alive. If we read his letters, we discover that he was stoned, that he was whipped, he was beaten. And here he is, possibly taking this vow to thank the Lord that he was still around to minister for him. Now, the vow usually lasted for about 30 days. And at the end of that period, he would have his head shaved, and the hair would be brought to the synagogue or to the temple to be offered as a burnt offering to the Lord. Okay? How about it? If we wanted a spiritual workout, how would you go about doing that? maybe there's a place for us doing what Paul did here. Maybe some of us for 30 days could quite usefully abstain from drinking alcohol. Well, what about abstaining from TV? And saying to the Lord, the time I normally spend watching my TV, I'll devote to you, just for that period. It's going to have an end in sight. And Lord, my purpose, my reason for doing this is I want to go deep with you. I want to be more like Jesus Christ. I want to soak my mind in the scriptures. I was so pleased that Carl said earlier on, he's reading through the Gospels. Because sometimes we can get so soaked into all the wonderful theology that we have in Paul's letters that we forget, actually, we're not following Paul, we're following Jesus Christ. And his intention is that we should live like him and for him. Paul abstained from alcohol. He abstained from vinegar and from one or two other things. And at the end, he had his hair shaved off. My friends, if you want to do something like that, please follow that pattern through so that your life can be devoted to the Lord for a period of time. That was Paul's vow. Interestingly, later on when Paul was writing to his protege, Timothy, he said this, and I've given you this text in your notes. Timothy, have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales. Rather, train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise both for this present life and for the life to come. Can I urge you, my friends, if you want to set yourself apart for the Lord for a period of time, put some disciplines in place in your life. Put it in some habits that will help you to be holy. I remember watching quite a moving film, actually, about a previous Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, at his retirement. And in it, he talked with a reporter who I thought was being a bit cynical about it, but he talked with this reporter about his prayer life. And he made this very telling comment. If I don't discipline myself to pray, no one else will do it for me. And I thought, what a telling and penetrating thing to say. He'd recognised that nobody's going to have a checklist on his prayer life, so he had to do it himself. Maybe that's something you'd like to focus on, something you'd like to work through in your own life. To spend a period of time praying probably more than you would, or in a different way from what you normally would, in order to see God glorified in your life. So Paul was taking probably a Nazirite vow. And now he was travelling around, seeing the church formed in Ephesus, and when he went to the church in Ephesus, he left these two people, Priscilla and Aquila, as leaders. Now, it may not be without significance that Priscilla, the wife, is mentioned first, because she too seems to share her husband's teaching ability. And it could be that when that Luke wants us to notice what happened, or the results of what happened on the day of Pentecost. You see, when the Holy Spirit fell, Peter was there to explain what was going on. And he said, this is what's happening, what was prophesied in the book of Joel, that your sons and your daughters will prophesy, that God's gifts are not sexist. And here is Priscilla, possibly named first, because initially she was the leader and teacher, and her husband followed her as a supporter. We don't know, but it's possible. That was often the way they put pairs together. We've already noticed how we had Barnabas and Paul to begin with, because Barnabas was the leader, and then they kind of swap over. We see Paul and Barnabas, because Paul was definitely leading at that point. So there's Paul's vow, the Nazirite vow. And by the time we get into the story about Apollos, we have Priscilla and Aquila leading the church in Ephesus, and we then have the arrival of this man, Apollos. And there are several things I want you to notice from Apollos' thumbnail sketch here. And for me, they come over as 4 imperatives, which you'll have in your notes. You can fill them in as we go along. And the first thing I notice from the life of Apollos is this. He encourages us to get into the scriptures. Look at verse 24 of Acts chapter 18. About the same time, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was a learned man with a thorough knowledge of the scriptures. Of course, that was the Old Testament. Now, coming from Alexandria in northern Egypt, he would have a particular reputation. Alexandria was the second most important city in the Roman Empire, and there was a large Jewish population there. In fact, Alexandria was divided into 5 areas, 5 wards, and 2 of those wards had Jewish leadership. Not only that, but it was a city that was renowned for its great learning, with a lot of scholars studying and researching there. In fact, it boasted a library of around about 700,000 volumes, which in that day was totally unprecedented. Very few cities had that sort of facility in them, because, of course, there was no printing. Every volume had to be handwritten. So to have 700,000 was just huge. And the Jewish quarter of the city was well known for developing an allegorical approach to understanding the Old Testament. In other words, they believed that the Old Testament had a surface meaning, which we can read from the text, but also it had a subsurface meaning, which was discovered or worked out by allegory. In other words, by drawing parallels with what was going on in the text. So, for example, they would derive their meaning from ideas, from words, from numbers, from pictures that you might see in the text. Now, this was where Apollos was taught, and may well explain why he was such a good teacher. It may also explain his approach to the Old Testament and to teaching. So, my friends, what I see from this is Apollos' life saying to us, get into the Scriptures. No time spent in God's Word is time wasted. Because we're drinking in his Word. There's an old preacher who used to say, I want my people to have bibline blood. In other words, for the message of the Bible to course through our veins so that it informs every part of our being, of our work life, of our decision making, of our family, of our relationships. Get into the Scriptures is the first imperative I see in Apollos' life. Second imperative I see in Apollos' life is communicate Christ with enthusiasm. Look at verse 25. Apollos had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervour, and he taught about Jesus accurately, even though he only knew the baptism of John. Don't you find that fascinating? This man knew the facts about Jesus, even though he's been in Alexandria. He even taught accurately about Jesus, but he'd never encountered the Spirit of Jesus. It seems to me that he's a classic example of the difference there is between knowing about something and knowing it. About knowing about a person and having a relationship with them. I could go to a house in Banstead in Surrey and talk to the wife who lives there with her husband. And she would tell me about her sister. She would describe her sister. And she could tell me about how they grew up together. She could tell me lots of stories about her sister, as many of us could tell stories about our siblings. But then I could go home, and I put my key in my front door, and I open it, and behind that front door, there's a person who looks astonishingly like her sister. I happen to have married her, and that's Rosie. Now, can you see the difference between knowing about and knowing? From Eleanor, I could only know about Ros, but because we're married and have been for many years, I know her. And that's what we've got here. Apollos knew about Christ, but he didn't know him that well. Even so, he spoke about Jesus with great fervour and enthusiasm. Do you know, when I was studying theology at London Bible College, we had a lecturer there, his name was Peter, and he was a stunning communicator, and in fact he lectured on communication. And his lectures were an example of the art. And people used to like listening to Peter whenever he spoke, whether it was in chapel or whether it was in these lectures. And what we noticed was that people were creeping into his lectures. In fact, it got to a stage where the room was so full that the class that was supposed to be in there actually couldn't quite get in. So I seem to recall the college had to make some announcement about this, and then they changed rooms and all this kind of thing. They dealt with it very well. But the fascinating thing to me was this man was so riveting to listen to. And I can remember coming away from some of his lectures thinking, do you know what? If Peter had been talking about Noddy and Big Ears, I would have been gripped by it. And I think that's what Apollos is here. He taught about Jesus accurately and fervently. He communicated Christ with enthusiasm. And that's the key often to reaching someone's heart. That's a key to an effective missionary. Because enthusiasm is infectious, it's compelling. I was on Tuesday, that's my day off this week, Rosie and I were down in town and we decided to pick up a coffee in Starbucks, which still incidentally sells the cheapest coffee in the Arndale Centre, you might like to know. So I went in there and I was standing in the queue and got to the man at the till, and I was ordering 2 Pike Place filter coffees and buying some beans. And there was a woman in her, looks like in her 20s, just behind me. And perhaps it was my order or something about me that told me that I had slightly more than a passing interest in the kind of coffee that we were drinking. And in a split second, I just happened to notice her. She caught my eye and she said, do you know, if you come here tomorrow, you can try out all sorts of different coffees. We're having a special tasting morning. Now, actually, I couldn't see any signs up about this. So I said to her, well, how did you know about this? And she said, I work here. And I explained to her that actually I couldn't come Wednesday morning because I've got a day job, as it happens. But I said, how come you're here? And she said, well, this is my lunch hour and I'm just buying some coffee. She's in her lunch hour at work buying coffee for herself. So I said to her, do you enjoy working here? And she looked me straight in the eye and she said, I love it, she said. My parents, I've got a degree, she said. Yeah, she said, I've got a degree and my parents are forever asking me when I'm going to get a proper job. But I'd stay here forever. She's an enthusiast. You're all going to go and get jobs in Starbucks now, aren't you? But that was Apollos. My dear friend, be an enthusiast for Christ. And you will find your life touching other people time and time and time again. I encourage you to get into the scriptures, but my dear friend, you don't have to be a theological expert to touch people's lives, but you do have to be an enthusiast. And that's what Apollos was, an enthusiast for Jesus. Now, the third imperative I see in Apollos' life is a really fascinating one, and it's there in verse 26. He says to us, fill up the gaps in your experience of Christ. Verse 26, he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, and Priscilla and Aquila heard him. And it must have been the way he's described here indicates that he's heard about Jesus from somebody who was with Jesus during his life and perhaps set off to evangelize, but had not picked up the message of what happened on the day of Pentecost. So when, verse 26, Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they recognized the gap. And they invited him to their home to explain to him the way of God more adequately. I can imagine them saying to one another, darling, he's right, but he's not quite there yet. And what was the gap? Well, we're told he only knew the baptism of John. That implies that he had repented, but he'd taken it no further. And it's possible that we can't prove it. He knew about Jesus' life and his miracles and Jesus' teaching, but had never made the connection between this and Jesus being the Messiah for him personally. Now, the change seems to come about in verse 28, but it could be he'd not made the connection between the Messiah in general and my Messiah in particular. And whatever it was, Priscilla and Aquila were placed on hand by God to complete this powerful man's knowledge and experience. And I don't know, but there may be some of us who are a bit like Apollos here. You've only ever felt repentance and never the true joy of forgiveness. Your whole Christian life has been saying sorry for the kind of person I am. And you've developed a kind of worm theology that God sees me as this worm, not this valued person who's made in his image. You may never have yielded yourself fully to Christ and allow God to fill you with himself. When the Bible talks about the filling of the Holy Spirit, it's as if God is investing part of his Spirit in us. Now, I don't say that in order to make you feel guilty. I just say that because it could be that some of us are a bit like Apollos. We've not quite got there yet. You may several times have been on the very brink of decision and then, for whatever reason, pulled back. And so I would say to you, my friends, as kindly as I can, fill up your gaps, the gaps in your experience of Christ. One of the great joys, in fact, I was talking to someone about this over coffee. One of the great joys for me, this guy came to me, he was in the first service, he said, "You're a covert evangelist, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm really." And he said, he's been doing some evangelism. And I said to him, for me, one of the great joys of the ministry is being able just to talk with ordinary people and help them take a step of faith so they know who Jesus is and the fact that Christ belongs to them and they belong to him. And when I do it, I feel it's not my place to put any pressure on someone. I try and use the maximum of reason and the minimum of pressure, because undue pressure can be disastrous. It results in a sort of spiritual miscarriage. And I will often say to someone, would you like me to pray with you, or would you like me to give you a prayer and you can take it away and pray it in your own time? And then they make the decision, because it's God's work, not mine. So, my friends, let's seek to communicate Christ with enthusiasm. And if there are gaps in your spiritual experience, make sure they get filled. I'm very happy to talk to you if that's the case for you. That's the third imperative that I see in Apollos' life. And the fourth imperative I see in his life comes out in verses 27 and 28. Apollos encourages us to help other believers. The principle, it seems to me, is that God doesn't give us knowledge of him or experience of him just for our own benefit. Our knowledge of him or our experiences of him are not intended to be spiritual trophies that I can put up on a cabinet, like cups from a competition that I've won. He intends us to share what we have. I was associated with a church, I spent some time there as a student, and one of the things that they did was they sent out what they called faith-sharing teams. And it was quite a simple idea, really. Groups of people from the church will go out to another church, perhaps a smaller local church nearby, usually sort of 10 or a dozen of them. They would spend 2 or 3 weeks in that church. They'd take time out of work very often to do this, in order to minister to people in the church, to pray with them and to enhance and share what God had given them with this other church. And the blessing that produced was just enormous. And I think that's what we've got here in Apollos, someone who's sharing his faith. Because when we share it, we increase it. Our faith never grows if we keep it all to ourselves. Verse 27, when Apollos wanted to go to Achaia, the brothers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples there to welcome him. On arriving, he was a great help to those who by grace had believed. Why? Because he now has received God's grace himself. He's got there. Now, in what ways did he help them? Well, verse 28 tells us he vigorously refuted the Jews in public debate, proving from the scriptures, from the Old Testament, that Jesus really was the Christ. Boy, would I love to have heard that man preach. To take the Old Testament and hear this man Apollos make it come alive and see Jesus way back in the Jewish scriptures. This man of great learning and great dignity would be showing verse by verse, argument by argument, reason by reason that Jesus really was who he says he was. And it's all there in the Bible. We must never underestimate, my friends, what God can do through us and in us when we devote ourselves fully to him and are enthusiastic in our communication of him. And what was the result? Well, if you'd like to see the result, come over to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. It's going to be page 1146 if you're using the Church Bible. Page 1146. Now, at this point in the letter of 1 Corinthians, Paul is actually ticking the Corinthian church off. He's saying, sorry, I split my infinitives there. He's ticking off the Corinthian church. He's saying, you're a fractious lot, because there's some of you who say, I follow Paul, and there's another bunch of you who say, I follow who? Apollos. So here, Paul and Apollos are being presented to us in parallel. As if Apollos' ministry was just as profound and had just as much impact as Paul's did. There's an indication of the extent to which God used this man, even though he didn't write letters that ended up in the New Testament. Or did he? For those of you who are interested in biblical research, let me toss out a tantalising possibility to you. Who wrote the book of Hebrews? It's a fairly short list of people who'd be capable of writing a book like that. And there are some theologians, and I can see a lot of mileage in this actually, that think the answer is Apollos. Certainly, allegorical approach to the Old Testament, yeah, that's there in Hebrews. Profound understanding of the Scriptures, yeah, that's there. An enthusiastic demonstration that Jesus is greater than angels, than Moses, than Abraham and so forth, yeah, that's all there in the book of Hebrews. So it kind of fits. We can't prove it, but there you go. For my money, you can probably look in that direction. So Apollos had a profound ministry in the early church. But just look at verse 6 in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Who is Apollos, said Paul, and who is Paul? We are only servants through whom you came to believe, servants as the Lord assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is really anything, but only God who made it grow. Paul's aim and Apollos' aim was that he should receive the glory. They weren't there for their own fame or benefit. They were there so that through their words the glory of Christ may shine in the lives of people who heard them. That's Apollos. Let's pray together, shall we?